Good afternoon, everyone. Can you please make sure to unmute your phone by pressing *6?
The conference has been muted.
They can't hear me. Shit.
The conference has been unmuted.
We can
Hello,
hear
everyone.
You.
Okay, good. Hello, this is Lonnie from the Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women.
Hi, Lonnie.
Hello. Thanks
Hello.
for joining us today.
Hello? Lonnie, you want us to be muted.
Yes, please. Hello.
Hello?
Can you please? All right, we're going to get started very soon here, ladies. We just need you to please mute your phone by pressing *6. I'm still hearing a lot of background noise. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's webinar. What I'll do is I'll just do a little bit of housekeeping and reminder. So again, I just want to remind everyone to avoid background noises. Please press *6 to mute yourself. I'm still hearing some background noises. Hello? All right, now if you have any questions at any point, you can press *7 to unmute yourself. Welcome. Now I'm going to turn this over to Sam Simmons.
Good afternoon, everyone. And I want to thank you for being a part of this webinar. As you can see, we're going to talk about trauma-informed approaches in engaging African American men. And so the biggest focus will be on exactly some ways of that I have found or have used to engage African American men. So, as you can see, this is my bio. I'm not going to get into all that. I don't even like it when other folks read it when I'm coming in to speak. But I've been around for a little while, and most of my work has been, especially over the last 15, 20 years, have been around working with African American men and their families around trauma, chemical dependency, violence abatement, and currently I am managing a Culture Pacific program over at Family Partnership to engage African American men and young men around ending violence against women and girls, and to address community violence. So, some numbers here. 35% African American women experience intimate partner violence at a rate of 35% higher than white women. A lot of these numbers, in terms of you doing the work, you probably have seen these numbers. It's off, I try to get as new numbers as we can, but they don't change. They haven't changed much over the years. And one of the numbers that actually, when I first found it out, was this one about intimate partner homicide, the leading cause of death for African American women between the ages of 15 and 45. I love sharing this number with my guys in having discussions about that and in the ways that might be. So, why, what really got me started in doing this work actually has a lot to do with me trying to seek some answers. People who fit don't seek. The seekers are those who don't fit. So, when something is working for a certain group of folks, they're less likely to seek, or if they're comfortable with what's going on. So I like that quote in terms of the journey, because this is going to talk about mine. So this is a picture of me and my brothers. I'm the one in the front. We used to take these orchestrated pictures often. I have no sisters, so we got 4 boys. I am the 3rd generation of men who either had some type of chemical problem and also had major issues in their relationships with the women in their lives. I have drug dealers, pimps, all of these in terms of our men folk. One of my grandfathers would be, if you've seen the movie Color Purple, one of my grandfathers would have been Mr. So this kind of runs in our family. One of the things that, in terms of being raised,
Chanel Webster,
please mute your phone, please.
Chanel, I can find Chanel on my Facebook.
Excuse me, we're hearing somebody talking in the background. Can you please mute yourself? Thank you.
So, so I was raised in a violent home. My father was 6'6", 310 pounds, and my mama was 5'2", 160. And one of the things about in our family is that we had physical abuse, emotional abuse, and verbal abuse going on, and it could vary from one parent to the other. And one of the promises I made early in my young life was never to be like my parents. The problem is I never figured out what that would take not to be like my parents. And I remember the first conversation I had with my mother, I was about 12 years old, because me and my mother had a strange relationship. Our relationship was my mother would sit down and talk to me like I was an adult in the house at 12, which was a pretty inappropriate. And so I remember sitting down with her one day or the day after one of their fights, and I asked my mother, why do her and my father stay together? And her answer was because of the kids. And my response to her was, don't the kids get a choice? Her response to me, as I usually say, is I don't remember what the response is. All I remember is there was some stars, because, evidently I was a little bit being too grown to ask that question. My first marriage, I was 19 when I got married the first time. I had a daughter and a stepson, and had my own home, which is for a lot of folks, being an African American man at 19 seemed to be surprising. It was just normal for me, and that first marriage didn't work out so well. And we decided that we decided for the most part that we was going to split up. Because one of the reasons I wanted to end the relationship *6. We need somebody to mute their phone.
The conference has been muted.
I don't think they can. Can you hear me?
The conference has been muted.
I can hear you.
The conference has been unmuted.
You can hear me now?
We can hear you when you unmute it.
Okay, but we're getting background because some of folks are not mutineers on their other end.
No, but if you mute everybody, we can still hear you.
Okay.
The conference has been muted.
Okay, so let's go on. Sorry about that. So in my first marriage, like I said, I was 19, and the thing was, in my first marriage, me and my wife had an incident where I actually slapped her. And one of the things that scared me about that is I felt like I would do it again, and that I needed to move on because I didn't keep my promise to myself. And so so at 22, because we had got married at 19, and so around 22 we decided to split up. And my first wife was up in the air if she wanted to split up or not, and told my mother what we was gonna do. And my mother came to Minnesota to have a conversation with me. Almost 10 years from the time we had the conversation when I was 12. And she was telling me that, well, you shouldn't split up. And she told me the reason I should stay was before the children. And my response to that was, I wasn't going to stay in the relationship and have my kids go through the same thing we went through when my parents stayed together for the 30 years. And so I did split up. And one of the things about that particular story is my daughter, who's currently, about 43, I know she don't like me telling her age, often when she speaks about the situation, she often tells folks that she felt that when we split up, that was the best thing for the relationship, because she would see me more often when we split up than it was when we were still married, because I found ways to not be at home, like working a lot. So that's my story. And so in that story, in terms of the trauma with my father and mother, my relationship with my father was one of those type of relationships, like if you've seen the movie recently, Fences, where, was that tension between the father and son, and I'm the oldest. And so, it was not a good situation. So you have that trauma. Then you have the trauma behind the fact that as men, we're taught not to deal with those emotions. So, the quick and dirty definition is a deep emotional wound, and then that trauma affects, we already know that the whole idea about masculinity in general can be toxic. But when you add the trauma to it, it makes it even more toxic. And then on top of that, when you don't allow men to the opportunity to deal with their trauma, then that trauma gets passed on to women and children. And and I remember I had this conversation about male trauma with some colleagues of mine, and in one of my advocates associates, and his, because we were doing a round table about the work we were doing in different cultural communities, and I was talking about the outcomes we were getting addressing trauma along with the domestic violence and ending violence with women, against women. And the one response was that they thought that I was allowing men to use trauma as an excuse to be violent. The issue wasn't even about that. The issue was, what we found is when we allowed these men to address their trauma, they were more likely to be able to find some empathy for the women in their lives, because it just seems to it was just interesting watching that happen. And again, you have this thing, hurt people hurt people. And that's really what started that work about addressing African American men and their trauma in the work we've been doing. Okay, let's get to the next one here. People who are trapped in history. People are trapped in history, and the history is trapped in them. So we'll talk a little bit about the trauma response in terms of what we see, particularly with the men we work with. We've got 3 examples here. When we're talking about especially toxic stress and toxic trauma, we see an increased aggression in terms of not just trying to control their physical environment, but their social environment. So a lot of the guys I have worked with over the years are not just violent in the home, they're violent outside the home as well. And their fear won't allow them to their fear and the triggers that are associated with the long-term trauma, that in most cases childhood trauma around violence and those kind of things, makes it easy, increases their reaction in a very aggressive way. And also makes them sensitive to their environment. So when I go out and speak, I will pick out a man in the audience and I will look at him and I will say, do we have a problem? And what I'm displaying is how simple, in terms of a person feeling disrespected because of the amount of trauma that came up by just somebody looking at them too long. And the interesting response from the person in the audience, in some cases, you'll actually see the men get up and actually get into a defensive posture and forget the fact that I'm actually doing a role model piece. So in the increased trauma also can affect people's immune systems, disturb the quality of emotional attachments in family and social relationships. In terms of one of the projects we do called the Be More Project, what we found when we were addressing the men and the young men, because originally we were supposed to train train older men to talk to younger men about violence against women. And what does it mean to have healthy relationships? And the work that we were going through with the men proved to us that they needed a whole lot more work going with them before they could actually really model what, or at least conversationally model what we needed for the young people. And so we kind of adjusted our project and really just started focus on our healthy relationships and not just speaking to men, African-American men and boys, but actually the African-American community. We would ask the question, when the last time you seen a healthy relationship? And, they all knew what they thought should be in a healthy relationship, like communication, understanding, respect. But when we asked them when the last time they seen one, a lot of times the rooms would go silent. And then the few who would describe a healthy relationship, it usually was older grandparents that they would see. So the whole piece is, in terms of that, is if I haven't seen that, recognize what a healthy relationship is, or my emotional attachments are not at a high quality, and then over time feel like that's normal, then that causes a lot of problems in terms of trying to address family violence and as well as community violence. Another trauma response is increased use of drugs and alcohol, and this has been true especially in the African American community. You may have seen others, but in our community historically we have used drugs and alcohol to medicate our trauma. Our trauma, just not in terms of the trauma we have with each other or the trauma we have in the community, but the trauma that is resulting from racism and oppression. And in being a licensed chemical dependency counselor, that's one of the other pieces I think is very imperative when we're talking about doing treatment, especially chemical dependency and drug treatment, is this issue of addressing being trauma-informed in terms of helping folks make that connection. That does not say that folks don't become chemically dependent, but that trauma piece is a very important piece. So these are just a few of the trauma responses we've seen amongst men. Only by seeing our problems clearly and experiencing them can we do something about them. So let's take a current look or a current example of one of, especially in my what I call my baby felon group. And the reason I call it a baby felon group is that I'm dealing with young men between the ages of 18 and 20, well, actually 18 and 35, but a lot of them are younger, around the 18, 25. And they're young. I mean, I'm old, so that makes them babies to me. And a good portion of them kind of fits this profile, and with that whole hypermasculinity ideal or identity. You know, poor emotional regulation, numbness, hyper-objectification, not just objectification of females, but hyper-objectification of females in terms of their language, in terms of their music, and in terms of their attitude. Female dependent on financially, emotionally, and socially, tie their masculinity to their sexual prowess, but there's a history for that for black men. Black men's masculinity has, especially black men with the history of American slavery, their masculinity has always been tied to sexual prowess. If you know, even especially when they weren't always able to participate in mainstream ways as well as their white counterparts. So when an example of that is when I was doing more fatherhood work, we would have my on average. Now there's always not a perfect example, but by white clients would have more. They actually were more concerned about telling somebody they didn't have a job than telling somebody they didn't have a girlfriend. Now, my African American clients, on average, were more concerned to make sure that they would let you know they have a girlfriend, but didn't have that same concern about letting somebody know they don't have a job. And it didn't matter what my clients' backgrounds were, because I worked with sex offenders and as well. And the interesting thing about them is, they would go get a job, and folks would hire them, and they worked a lot of construction. So, but again, with the sexual prowess, is this that again you would see it in especially my younger men. With these individuals, often they came from, most of them come from the urban areas, so the cities, and have experienced multi experiences of trauma, both as a perpetrator and a victim. And when we talk about rite of passage, historically, rite of passage in many communities was when men would take young men under their wings and teach them how to be men. Well, what we have found with a lot of the men I've been dealing with is that rite of passage involves some type of trauma. I remember every now and then I will ask the group, when did you decide you was a man? And we would go around the room and you would get all these examples. Like for one guy said, I was 16 and I was in front of the judge and he said 8 to 10 years in prison. He says, I knew at that moment I was going to be a man, or had to be a man, or unplanned pregnancy at the age of 15 or 14, the death of an older brother due to violence. There would be all these examples of trauma that initiated them to the next level of manhood, at least in their mind. And again, I remember one young man who at 14, he would say that he told me a story about his mama had a date, and the date came over and was waiting for his mother. And this 14-year-old asked this adult, what's your intentions for my mother? And the adult looked at the 14-year-old and says, "It's none of your business." And he talks about he took a 45 and put it on the coffee table and asked him if it was his business now. And that's that whole response to they have to their trauma. Okay. The issue is not are we going to pay. It's are we going to pay now up front, or are we going to pay a whole lot more later on? So this is a quote that's in reference to how do we address trauma early in one's life, and it goes along with the work I do around adverse childhood experiences and how those experiences affects adults. So let's move on. This slide is actually we're going to start talking a little bit more about one of the groups I do to address both domestic violence and community violence with this particular group of men. So the title of the group is Cognitive Awareness Violence Abatement Program. We call it CAVA, and primarily work with that young population that I mentioned of 18 to 40, African men, and in this case, all of them are either on probation or parole. And the objective is to increase their awareness of their personal trauma and attachment issues, and how they relate to their violence in their relationships and their violence in their life. Get them to take a look at some of the behaviors and beliefs they have both about themselves, about about women in their lives, and including their the beliefs and behaviors they have about their children, and hopefully learn some ways to regulate and express their emotions, all of their emotions, in a nonviolent way, and learn how to take responsibility for their behavior in the process of addressing these, regulating these emotions. And then fourth, identifying replacement behaviors and attitudes. How do I get my point across when I'm upset? How do I identify being upset? How do I learn how to relax when I'm stressed in my life? So the target population of this particular group was either a lot of them were undereducated, a lot of them were single parent, or came from single parent homes, or female controlled households. And the reason I throw in the female controlled households is a good 30% of my guys, or maybe even more, were raised in two-parent homes, but the home was ran by the moms. And even in the home I grew up in, even with the violence, my mother actually ran the home in her own way, and so that's why we have that in there. Again, the poor emotional regulations, have little or no work experience. A lot of these guys have never worked. We do have a portion of them who actually currently have jobs. A strong need to be a good father or a better father than their own. Now, they have these strong needs, but the ironic part is they don't have the correct information to do that. You know, they have this illusion that since they are around, unlike their fathers not being around, that's enough. And within that, we also talk about, and I'll talk about a little bit more, about how they have children and how is that a trauma response. The threat of jail and intimate being incarcerated is not a successful deterrent for this population. I have a lot of guys who have not been successful in other programs. I know when we're talking about addressing domestic violence, we talk about corrections and we talk about the police intervention, which I firmly believe in. But at the same time, with this population, the deterrence is not there as much as we would like it to be. Also, which I don't have listed here, is quite a few of our guys are in the group because of violation of protection orders. And that has increased over the last 5 years or more, actually probably even more, especially amongst African American men at a higher percentage. In some cases, almost 100% increase in those violations. And we can, and that's a whole nother presentation by itself in terms of what's behind some of that. So relationships, the relationships are again female dependent. A lot of times amongst us in the field, we call it the baby boy syndrome. There's a movie that came out in, I believe, the late 80s called Baby Boy that's actually played on BET all the doggone time. But it really lays it out, where you have this young man who lives with his single mom, has 2 children with 2 different women, and how he don't have a regular job, but very dependent on these females in his life, and really doesn't grow up and meet his not growing up to meet his full potential as a man. Also, dealing with codependency, deal with codependent females or the same type, or females from the same type of family. When we're talking about not knowing how to be in relationship, or dysfunctional relationships have become to feel normal between both them and the women they are in the relationships with. Very controlling relationships, disrespecting women, take all their anger out on the anger of their mothers out on their girlfriends, and this is very true with this particular group, because this group, if they were raised in an urban area, would have been grew up during the crack era. And during the crack era, the devastating effect of crack on the urban community came about because it affected the women in the community. And one of the things about many communities, especially the black community, the kids are very unforgiving in terms of the mama's flaws. And I've had these conversations with black mamas who have had drug use in their past, or drug use in their past when they were raising their children. And so, so just having conversations about their relationships with their mothers really unleashes a lot of pain and trauma, especially from communities, and especially the African American community, where you're not supposed to say anything negatively about your mother, no matter how negative it might be. But in seeing that being acted out on their relationships with females, and unfortunately, folks have a tendency to pick folks like their mothers and that kind of thing. So it's helping them understand that. Inappropriate loyalty to their male friends, and the inappropriate loyalty is not really knowing what loyalty is. Loyalty based on lies, and these relationships make it very difficult, both those and the ones they have with the women in their lives, on how to forgive, learning how to forgive others, learning how to forgive themselves. That seems to be a big piece, is them forgiving themselves for the things they've done in their lives. And then lastly is relationships based on the back of children, and maybe even multiple women. And basically what I'm saying is this situation of consummating relationships with children, and in having that conversation. That's a conversation, again, that's new for them. Having kids to, as one guy said, well, Mr. Simmons, you only have one child. What about your legacy? And having to explain to them what legacy really means. It's something you leave to your children. It's not that you leave children. And part of that comes from their view, which I didn't put in the trauma response. One of the trauma responses is having this view that of your future is being short and being deadly. And when you have that view, what is folks going to remember you by? And so, again, this having relationships in the back of children. Another example would be when I was doing more of the father work, we would get young men who would go through the Father's Project, do great jobs, change their lives, get their lives cleaned up. I had one who had like 5 or 6 kids, I think 3 or 4 baby mothers or mothers of their children, and was in a current relationship, good relationship. They're happy and that kind of thing. And he says, you know, Mr. Simmons, we're thinking about having another child. And he was surprised by the look on my face. It's like, oh, that sounds fine, but you got these other 5 or 6 kids that you can barely take care of now. Why would you do that? Well, you know, the relationship is good, and I ain't never felt this happy, and blah, blah, blah. Well, you don't do that on the back of children. Well, she won. Well, then that's the price you got to pay. You know, you might need to let her know you can't have no more children or don't need to have no more children. Well, no, that's the price you got to pay for making those choices. And those kind of conversations were, you know, often don't get had. So this is the curriculum, and inside this curriculum we have those conversations. You know, the critical thinking about why we do what we do, talking about self-defeating behavior and the fear that's associated with not giving up negative behavior. You know, why is it that people will continue to do behavior that is still harmful even when they know better? Having that conversation. And the issues around hypermasculinity, talking about what that is, helping them understand that they are acting that out, how to respect themselves and others. A lot of times, I'd like to, one of the statements I use with them often is, I can tell how much you respect yourself by the way you handle disrespect, which is a very important piece for men in general, but for individuals, especially for this generation of 40 and under, actually 39 and under, for both male and females. When you felt like when you're raised in trauma, anything can feel disrespectful, and so that whole idea, because every last one of the men, when I ask them, do you respect yourself, they're all going to say yeah. But when I mention to them that I can tell how much you respect yourself by the way you handle disrespect, that really kind of confuses them greatly. And I usually like to do that right at the end of the group so they can think about it the whole weekend. You know, and they come back and they really ponder that idea, because that's a strange concept to them. But it goes a long way. And then the whole issue around the core beliefs of around relationships and those negative effects of those core beliefs. What's the difference between different types of relationships? So yeah, they're there to deal with their violence and everything, in their violence in the relationship. But the key issue is what I try to explain to them. I'm trying to teach you how to stay safe. And some, folks will say, "What do you mean? What do you mean they be safe?" If there's safety in understanding my own self, there's safety in addressing my own emotions. There's safety in being truthful with me that I don't know. There's safety in addressing my pain because I will make better choices if I can get as much of that out. And when we have actually, especially have been fairly successful with the guys in doing this work around that kind of concept. And then we talk about historical trauma and male trauma and emotional health. So that how do we manage our impulses, understanding our history, or how do we get from our history, our family history, how do we get where we're at now, and then belief systems that we mentioned earlier. And then stress management, how to support nonviolence and independence. How do I manage my stress? in parts of the African American community, stress management is not something that we talk about a lot. Stress management might be, some things that are not so healthy. So having this conversation about stress management, what healthy stress management is, having a drink is not necessarily healthy stress management, okay? But learning how to balance your life. One of the things we talk about is one of the ways you can manage your stress is manage your time. And that might mean learning how to say no. Because one of the biggest things that we found in terms of the community, and not just, the community and individually, one of the biggest dependencies that are difficult for the African American community and individuals to give up is codependency, our inability to disconnect. And that makes some sense because historically, the collective has always been more important than the individual. And so not being alone, being needy, those kind of things, that codependency, it's all of us together. Okay. The history is not about the past, it's about the present. So, provider skills. So, we'll spend a little time on this. And some of these things are probably familiar to you. Being aware of one's own bias about black men in general, and our bias we might have to the ideal that men actually have trauma and hurt. Now, some folks would say, oh, man, I don't know. What do you mean, actually believe that ideal? Why wouldn't somebody believe that ideal? They might believe that ideal, but sometimes they don't treat the men like they do have trauma and pain, thinking that lets them off the hook. It really doesn't. Skills in working with highly manipulative individuals. So that means we have to be patient, have thick skin, avoid trying to accomplish too much in a group. Almost every group that we put together seems to always want to have 2 hours. If you're doing what I found with this trauma work, if I can get a good 45 minutes in with these guys and have them maintain it, I get a lot done. 2-hour groups don't work with this population that well. And not if you're really trying to get them to maintain and really apply what's being said. Be aware of the members' cognitive abilities and motivations. So that means that some folks can take certain things in, and some folks can't. So that means being flexible in the ways that you present the information. So we use video. We actually, most of the time, we just sit down and have a conversation with a topic on the board and really kind of help them connect it to their lives using real life examples. So again, that brings you to that next line of flexibility and creativity in the materials and in the classes. So, and in the class, and not everybody can do this, but the way my guys express themselves, I really don't put a lot of parameters around the way they express themselves. We don't call women out of their name, but other than that, we don't put a lot of other parameters around the way they express themselves, because I want them to express themselves. I want them to have the conversation. I want them to think. That's really what it boils down to, improve their awareness and think. I'm dealing with men who are just reactionary to moments, situations, people, places, and things. Don't ignore race. In the past, I've worked with groups that might not have a facilitator of color and would just shut men down when they would bring up the issue of race. If you ignore race, then they hide behind race. And allow them to actually fall back into their own victimization, but there's a way to address those kind of things. And then the code of silence, which still runs in the African American community and amongst the men. Again, and that, as well as the women, for the reasons of distrusting the state and distrusting the system, and in some cases, in a lot of cases, rightfully so. African Americans have not made addressing sexual assault and abuse collective priority because the people have been so ashamed, and this is something that has happened to them. So what this quote is really talking about is historically sexuality has been used against African Americans and probably folks of color, but definitely African Americans, because again, black men were brought, both black men and black women were brought here as Africans as slaves for their physicality and their sexuality. So when you look at abuse, a lot of times my clients, when we bring up sexual abuse, even though we can show the numbers, they will say that's a white thing. Why are we talking about it? I remember it was a group that we had about 15 guys in a room. I said, we're going to talk about sexual assault tonight. And they all said, why are we going to talk about that? Well, let me ask you this question. How many of you have been in a relationship where the woman was comfortable enough to let you know that she was sexually assaulted? Out of those 15 guys, 13 raised their hands. And I said, and how often you think there was white individuals that were coming in the community doing that? And that made the point. So let me keep going because we're running out of time here. Strong cultural stigma around mental health and trauma. You know, supporting the suffering is part of being black. You know, or you ain't black enough until you suffered enough. And what we do, we don't even talk about mental health. We talk about emotional health. How do I manage my emotions so they don't look so crazy? The issue of the cost of this community and family loyalty. You know, what stays in here, what goes on here stays in here. I tell the story of Uncle George. Uncle George has passed, and we're getting ready to have a funeral for him. And he's 80 years old. And in the funeral, one of the nieces named Sally shows up, and all the other people are what she's doing here, because you ain't seen Sally in 15 years. So we have this great funeral for Uncle George. At the end of the funeral, the women go in one room and the men go in the other. We hear this blood-curdling scream come from the room with the women. And what they realize is Uncle George has sexually assaulted 3 generations of girls in the family. And that type of loyalty to the collective is one of the things that also comes out of the slave narrative, because the issue was we're all in this together, and we have to. And if they would complain about one of the men sexually assaulting one of the girls, then they would all get punished. And then we can add in this whole issue around in some quarters our religious views, where we won't talk about sexuality, healthy sexuality, and some of the views we have about gay and lesbian issues in with some of the religious views. Other beliefs and obstacles is that, you know, racism, the myth that black families are inherently violent or are dysfunctional, disempowering black men by the larger society. Many interventions take color-blind approaches. In other words, every approach don't work for all communities. That's one of the reasons. One of the reasons when we talk about the increase of violation of order protections has increased so substantially in the African American community. I had that conversation with some folks in some of the counties about what did I think that increased that. Well, we're not paying attention to how these people or these individuals are having their relationships, both on the male and female side. Distrust of institutions, disproportionate economic disadvantage. So now we got 2 folks who are living together because of economics. And black men have not been good. They haven't I don't think they've been good beneficiaries of this whole American patriarchy. You know, be the head of the house and and the main breadwinner and all these other kind of pieces, when in some cases that hasn't been as easy as we would like it to be when we talk about racism. And so now you're trying to live up to a patriarchy that don't even include you. That has not been beneficial for black men, black women, and black families. Human compassion is equal to human cruelty. It is up to each of us to tip the balance. So how do we meet the challenge? Well, we need to incorporate historical and cultural perspectives and as a trauma part in terms of our informed care services and interventions, be aware of our biases and our beliefs that when we're dealing with different cultures, and most of all, change will not come without people in power being willing to be uncomfortable. We have to start doing things differently for different groups, and that's the true essence of equity. Equity is about not everything being fair. Equity is about what is unfair that we have to use to balance out a situation. So many times things don't get changed. Folks know they should change, but people in power don't want to be uncomfortable. And I don't blame, nobody wants to be uncomfortable, but if they're not willing to be uncomfortable, they can talk all day. Black community, we need to do a better job of talking about these issues in the African-American community. We do not do a good job. We're doing more. Ironically, more of the female pastors in the church. There's some male pastors, but the female pastors, I've done a lot of work with them in the community around domestic violence, sexual assault, being able to talk about that, identify it. And again, this is one of them pieces that as institutions and community leaders and health professionals, we really need to be able to do that in the community. And compassion, accountability, because compassion without accountability is chaos. Accountability without compassion is never fair, because there's a lot of times when they talk about approaching men, but black men in particular, well, we got to hold them accountable. Accountability without compassion is never fair, because you always like somebody better than the other, and you're going to let them slide. And going back and forth, this make you inconsistent. So compassion and accountability, because it got to be some compassion if you're working with people. I don't care what gender they are. And so we want to seek truth, understanding, forgiveness, justice, humility, and leave others in power without blame and excuses. And what can men do? Men in the community can model nonviolent and respectful for their partners, showing them respect and holding other men accountable. Talk to men and boys about healthy relationships and healthy manhood. Express a broad range of emotions to support both men and boys in their emotions in a safe way. How do I express them in a safe way for them and everybody involved? I think I'm done.
The conference has been unmuted.
Okay. We're opening the line. I know that was a lot.
For questions, please press *7 to unmute yourself. Is there any questions for Sam?
Sam.
Yes.
Are there resources in the community for men that have been wrapped up in the life, as it were, in crime and, whatever, that have turned their lives around, and now that they're, might be older in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're trying to turn things around and do things the right way, but there's a lack of jobs history, there's a lack of skill sets, What do you suggest that we do with our friends and family that are at that age now that don't want to be involved in the gangs and that really are trying to do the right thing, that are having problems with housing, finding housing, and jobs?
Well, it's hard to do anything when they're not available.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of jobs available right now, though. But I'm just not seeing my African American male friends getting them. I mean, unemployment in Minnesota is very, very low. And I know many people that have 2 or 3 jobs, including African American women, but I don't see the African American men getting that same, the reciprocation. They're not getting hired. They're not getting that interview. They're not getting a chance to even meet with the landlord. Because I know, being a felon myself, I know that people don't care about the felonies so much anymore. But they do care about your lack of job, your credit rating, things like that we might not have. That, being black, we might not have a good credit rating. We might not have, or white, whatever. But I'm just saying, this demographic of men that I'm talking about, I see a lot of them stuck, and I feel for them.
Yeah, and so do I. You got a couple things going on there. One is that whole idea of being willing to be uncomfortable. There's a lot of folks who just don't hire black men. Right. They're not. They're afraid. And then when we're talking about older black men, it's not even just the older black men either. The other issue is most jobs are service jobs, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't have good emotional skills, I'm not going to keep a service job.
True that.
And we don't do enough work around that emotional skills that's what I've been talking about over the last couple of years, is how do we do a better job on that emotional health side? Because when I was young, we had factories, okay? And you didn't have to have no people skills to work in a factory. Matter of fact, you could beat the dude up next to you long as he got up off the floor and pushed that button on that machine. We were good. Right. See, and so the thing is the only, because there's a lot of folks who are working with our folks who are not African American who are factory workers with their skills. Their people skills are bad too, but it don't get counted against them the same way.
Right.
And see, and that's the biggest thing, is how do we get them to adjust in an emotional way to be amongst people who might not want to be bothered with them. And that's why that whole thing around respect, learning how to show your self-respect by dealing with folks who might not show you respect. How do you do that and keep a job? And that's not just happening with the older brother who actually, when you're talking about a brother who's in his 45 or 50, that brother is scared to death because he's still alive. He never planned to be there alive that long.
Yeah.
And so that's not just happening with them. That's happening with my young professionals, young male professionals as well. They get on, trying to manage their emotions on jobs where folks who are uncomfortable or whatever, or they're not being able to manage their emotions in a way that they don't come off as being angry all the time. And there's a history of that. So that's a critical piece right now, is because 70-80% of jobs are about working with folks and and maintaining your emotional stability on the job.
Mm.
So if we really want to help them, we need to work on that. We need to also do better partnerships, in which there's some starting to happen in terms of how do we house these individuals so that they're not as dependent on the females in their lives.
Right. That's deep.
So, but I think you see my information here, at least my email. I think my email, or my website on the slide. I would love to talk to you more about that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm sorry that we're at the end. Again, if you need to reach out, all we have on here is my website. Go to my website, you get all the information you need, and feel free to reach out to me. I appreciate you all. I know it was a lot of information, but that's just, it was longer than that. So y'all take care. Have a great weekend.